It's clear to everyone today that America has lost its way. The problem is they don't know where to point the finger. Liberals blame conservatives, conservatives blame liberals, Democrats versus Republicans, and it's all a shadow show, folks, because the global fascists control both sides. They play both ends against the middle. Of all the U.S. presidents, probably one of the best educated and the one that was in the best position to understand this National Socialist or Nazi infiltration of the United States was President John F. Kennedy. He cut his teeth by writing a book called Why England Slept, which pulled apart the circumstances of the appeasement of Hitler and the Nazis and how that led to World War II. So he was certainly understood all this. And in his brief time as president, he began to take steps that was curtailing the power of this growing national security state as well as the corporate power. The Kennedy Tax Act of 1962, closing tax loopholes for the multinational corporations. He was going to, by many statements, he was going to withdraw us from the Vietnam War. And in 1963, he even began to try to curtail the power of the Federal Reserve System and even issued $6 billion in currency, non-interest bearing currency, through the Treasury Department rather than through the Federal Reserve System that we must pay interest on. And this, of course, is what led to his assassination. And this explains why that the military chiefs at that time, the mafia chieftains at that time, the FBI, CIA leaders at that time, Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, they're all dead and gone. And yet the power still exists to cover up the high-level coup d'etat that took place in this country in 1963. The plan to take over America involved several things. First, they had to get control of the U.S. economy. This was accomplished in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act, when bankers gained control over our money supply, the very thing that Thomas Jefferson had warned us against back at the time of the American Revolution. And then after World War II and with the contingencies of wartime, they began to create what is now called the national security state. They did this by bringing in an influx of unreconstructed Nazis and rolling them into our space program and into our military industrial complex, into our mind control scientific establishment, which spread into the universities. And the problem here is that when we accepted this Nazi technology, we also got their ideology. And then by the time that Bush became president, and by the time that Cheney and Rumsfeld were ascending to power, they transformed and consolidated this national security state until we see today where the checks and balances are being eroded, they're being done away with, and we're being led into a fascist type system. Fascism being defined as the combining of state, government, and corporate power. With Kennedy's death, the national security state surged ahead, the shadow government began to consolidate their power, and Lyndon Johnson, who was up for grabs, could be bought by most anybody, plus he had heard the guns go off in Dealey Plaza. He knew who his masters were, and he was guided by his council of wise men, all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And then, of course, after Johnson, we got Richard Nixon, who was put into power in the government and into political office by Nazi money. And then Nixon appoints George Herbert Walker Bush, the son of the Nazi financier Prescott Bush, who was prosecuted in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemies Act for handling money for the Nazis, who sat on the board of the America-Hamburg steamship line, and which was the major conduit for Nazi spies, saboteurs, and propaganda into the United States. And that's when they began to consolidate their power, and that's when they began to push for neoconservatism, another name for National Socialism. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States were presented with a plan called Operation Northwood. This was a plan to plant bombs in American cities, target American citizens for assassination, hijack ships and planes, and blame it all on Castro. This plan was actually submitted to and signed off on by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was President Kennedy who put a stop to it and said, No, we don't operate this way. We're not going to do this. He fired Admiral Lemser, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs, and he ordered all the copies of Northwoods destroyed. But typical government, one copy survived in a government file somewhere, and ironically enough, it was in the early 90s, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board that was created by Congress in the wake of the Oliver Stone film, JFK, and the outcry from the public to know what really happened to Kennedy, and they were given the authority to go into government files and look for anything pertaining to Kennedy's assassination or government policy at that time, and they found the Northwoods documents. So again, we see the curtain lifted slightly, and we get to see the plans of this national security state, these national socialists that have taken control in the United States. Everyone who has either lived through it or has studied American history since the 1950s agrees that November the 22nd, 1963, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy marked a turning point in the history of the United States, and the turn was downward. We have lost prestige, we have lost everything in decline since that event. And what we see then is that this is the benchmark for the ascendancy of what has come to be known as the shadow government. This is when they pull off the gloves, and this has made an overt move to create a coup d'etat in the United States, and felt like that they had enough power to pull it off. And by the time they had consolidated this power in the Reagan years, it has only become grown stronger and stronger until today. People have finally, it is so overt and so in your face that people have finally begun to understand that this is moves to destroy the Democratic Republic of the United States. So today we find ourselves in a situation of where it doesn't matter whether you vote conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, you're still going to get the globalist, fascist, the National Socialist, the Nazis. And it's incumbent upon us today, because today everyone understands that America's in trouble, but they can't understand where to point the finger. And it's time for all Americans, no matter what color, no matter what race, no matter what religion, no matter what political stripe, to stand up as freeborn Americans and point the fingers at these people who've been manipulating and controlling our history for the last at least 60 years, probably 100 years, and identify them for what they are: National Socialist, Nazis, and fascist, and cleanse our body politic of this so that we can restore a constitutional republic and the freedom and the liberty that we were given by our ancestors.